Do you know the rules of a deep-sea recovery operative? Not the ones in the official manual, but the real ones. You don't? Well, it's time I told you. If you want to survive in this business, there are things you need to learn before you even touch the equipment. The reason I've lasted 27 years in this job isn't skill, and it isn't luck. It's because I followed the rules. My name is Jim Harrison. My knees creak. My left ear is deaf, and I smell of rust even when I'm dry. But I'm alive. In this line of work, that's achievement enough. About this left ear, it's not just old age. 3 years ago, at a certain site, I heard something I shouldn't have. The sound itself ruptured my eardrum. The doctors couldn't explain it. It wasn't typical acoustic trauma. Physically, my eardrum was intact. Still, I couldn't hear. It was as if my brain simply refused the sound. Today, I'll tell you about the company you've been assigned to. But first, a warning. Once you hear this, you'll know the rules. And once you know them, you can never go back to being a normal diver. Do you remember your last normal job? I do. It was cleaning a swimming pool. A simple pipe repair at the local high school. The water was clear, you could see the bottom, and there was nothing dangerous. Back then, I could still sleep at night. I didn't drown in my dreams. Now, even shallow water makes me uneasy. Even when I get into a bathtub, I subconsciously check the depth, because you never know what's beneath the surface, what might be waiting. It all started with the contract you signed yesterday. You probably think you've become a rescue diver. Sounds heroic, doesn't it? Saving drowning children, recovering valuables from sunken ships, giving people hope. If that's what you think, get rid of that illusion right now. I thought so too, at first. My resume read Marine Salvage Specialist. I proudly told my family, I'm in a job that saves lives. My wife worried, but she was proud too. Then, 6 months later, I started lying to my family. When they asked,
What did you do today?
I'd say, routine rescue training, when in reality, I was recovering unidentified metal containers from 200 meters deep. I wasn't allowed to ask what was inside, but I was told to carry a Geiger counter. We operate under private contracts, but most of our assignments don't come from civilians. We don't issue press releases. We don't paint our company name on the side of our trucks. There's no logo even on our wetsuits. Even the company building has no sign. The address is just a P.O. box. The office is located in the back of an old shipyard, and the sign just says Marine Equipment Maintenance. On my first day, I got lost 3 times. It took a while to realize it was intentionally obscure. Requests arrive via encrypted messages from the military, from insurance companies, from nameless individuals, from men in expensive watches who don't give their surnames. Sometimes, the same man appears repeatedly among them, tall, in a perfectly gray suit, always carrying the same leather briefcase. In 12 years, I've seen him 6 times. He doesn't age. His hair color never changes. The same scar on his left cheek. The same cold smile. When he comes, the case is always special priority. You sign additional insurance paperwork. Update your next of kin contact. You're recommended to review your will. What they want is for someone to dive down and bring something back. No analysis, no theories required. Find it, tag it, surface. That's it. A capsule, a wooden crate, a drone, a body, even a hatch that shouldn't be there. Take a picture, record the location, and don't touch it until the recovery team arrives. Let's talk about the bodies. Not ordinary bodies. not typical conditions for people who drowned at sea. These bodies are preserved, as fresh as if they died yesterday. But the clothes they wear are decades old. Their watches are stopped at different times. Once, I found a man in a World War II-era military uniform, in perfect condition. His skin was pale, but not decomposed. In his pocket was a newspaper from 1943. It was dry. After more than 70 years underwater, it was dry. You're not allowed to talk about what you saw later, even if you remember it every time you close your eyes. Did you read the fine print in your contract? Most divers sign without reading. In the lifetime non-disclosure clause, there's one strange line. The company shall not be liable for exposure to content of unverified origin. I once tried to consult a legal professional about that line. 3 lawyers refused. When I asked why, they said conflict of interest. The 4th listened, then said he suddenly got busy and hung up. The 5th closed his practice the next day. It's not a typo. It's been there since before I arrived. You don't ask what it means. You don't ask anyone. Those who stay in this job long enough to have an idea about that line never share it. However, late at night, in a bar, old divers, drunk enough, sometimes whisper about what unverified might mean. They talk about things that can't be proven by science, things that don't follow the laws of physics, things that shouldn't exist. Unverified doesn't mean doesn't exist. It means cannot be measured. It means cannot be recorded. It means cannot be explained. The pay is excellent. You'll notice that quickly. It's deposited fast into your account. No unfamiliar deductions. No delays. Full medical insurance. Comprehensive benefits. And you don't have to worry about taxes. Everything is pre-processed. There must be some special arrangement with the government. Your pay stubs don't have the usual federal and state tax lines. Instead, there's a line for special jurisdiction deduction. The medical insurance is unusually comprehensive. It covers psychiatric treatment, long-term care, experimental therapies, and even a category for non-traditional medical interventions. At first, I was grateful, but now I understand what they're expecting. The equipment is top tier. You get a new kit every 6 months. Equipment designed for depths and pressures civilians don't reach. You use tracking devices, communication gear, and imaging tools not sold outside of military circuits. Let's talk about the cameras. On the surface, they look like standard underwater recording devices. But if you dig deep into the settings menu, you'll find strange options: anomalous light spectrum recording, time distortion correction, non-linear acoustic filtering. I've never used these features. I don't know how. But on certain sites, the camera sometimes switches to these modes automatically. When I play back later, what was recorded is sometimes different from what I saw. Everything is real. Everything works. They don't cut corners. That part is true. But there's something else you'll notice. Not right away, but you will. The turnover rate is high. The numbers aren't released. If you ask HR, they'll say it's not subject to disclosure, but you can count for yourself. When I started, there were 22 divers on the team. 3 years later, only 4 of the original members, including me, remained. There are no announcements. No one is fired. Not really. People just don't come back. You hear stories of them being transferred. You hear a name once, and then never again. You find a locker that hasn't been touched in weeks. The boots inside are lined up, as if waiting. Let's talk about the contents of the lockers. They say they send personal belongings to the families, but sometimes, during cleaning, Strange things are left behind. People in photographs you don't recognize. Places in diaries that don't exist on any map. Letters dated in the future. Once, I opened the locker of a colleague named Mike. He was supposed to have been transferred 3 weeks earlier. All his equipment was inside. But in the picture frame was a photo of a man who wasn't the Mike I knew. Same name, pictured with the same family, but a completely different face. Sometimes the crew makes quiet comments.
He gave up. She left.
That's all. That's all they say. But late at night, when you're alone in the empty locker room, sometimes you hear sounds. The sound of metal doors opening, footsteps, the sound of someone organizing equipment. You turn around, and no one is there. All the lockers are closed. Still, in the morning, someone's locker is sometimes slightly ajar. You're still new, still dry. You'll learn more as you get more dives under your belt. The right stories will come naturally. They always do. In 27 years, I've seen about 300 sites. Of those, I can't talk about roughly 30. Not physically can't talk. The words just won't come out. My throat tightens, my tongue won't move. This isn't a contractual restraint. It's a physical reaction. It's as if my body refuses to put certain memories into words. But there are things I should tell you already. The kind of stories that get passed down. You don't have to believe them. I won't blame you if you don't. But for your own safety, just listen anyway. These stories have a common thread. They all involve water. They all happen in deep places. And they're all stories about something being in the wrong place, temporally, physically, ontologically in the wrong place. These aren't campfire stories. They're records, site notes, fragments of something larger that no one wants to talk about officially. I'm giving these to you now, before you go too deep, so you don't freeze up trying to understand everything when your turn comes. Because you can't understand. You don't need to understand. You just need to know what to look for. Let's start with the story the new recruits call the Angel Dive. That name doesn't sit right with me. There was nothing divine about that place. This site was a turning point in my career. The boundary that separates who I was before and who I became after. After that day, it became difficult for me to look into my own eyes in the mirror. The request came through a third-party shipping agent. We weren't told who marked the site, just that it was a priority shipwreck along the coast. A private vessel, registered under a shell company, coordinates fixed to the side of a sheer cliff that had collapsed in a recent storm. Let's talk about the storm. Local fishermen called that storm a 100-year storm. But that's not accurate. If you check weather records, a similar storm occurs exactly every 100 years. 1823, 1923, and 2023. After the storm, the coastline changed. New coves appeared, old reefs vanished. It was as if the sea itself had redrawn the map. Half of the rock face had fallen into the water, dragging an old structure. Not on any official charts with it. I said, old structure, but that's not accurate. It wasn't ancient, but at the same time, it didn't match any known architectural style. It was as if someone had buried a building from the future in the past. Sonar scans found something strange. A void under the debris. An empty space where there should have been nothing. That happens often in limestone, especially near salt water. Caves form over time. But the sonar images also had other anomalies. The objects inside the void showed too geometric a shape, too regular to be natural formations, too old to be artificial. But this was bigger than usual, longer, deeper. Estimates suggested the cave system extended at least 2 kilometers deep. deeper than the seafloor. That was geologically impossible. We were dispatched for exploration, me and 2 others. I won't name them. They didn't last long after this incident. By now, they probably don't want this story dug up. One was Mark, the other Sarah. Mark moved inland after retirement, to a desert 300 kilometers from the sea. Sarah. I'll talk about Sarah later. We descended just after dawn. The surface was as still as a mirror, unnaturally clear, as if the sea was welcoming us. We moved slowly, clearing rock fragments, marking our path with lines as we progressed. The visibility was too good. At 30 meters depth, where sunlight shouldn't reach, it was strangely bright. We looked for a light source but found none. The water itself seemed to glow. The cave entrance opened like a fractured mouth in the cliff. Sharp edges, crumbling shelves, mounds of earth that looked like they might slip again if you touched the wrong fragment. At the entrance, we checked the thermometer. The seawater outside was 8 degrees Celsius. Inside the cave, it was 15 degrees Celsius. It's not normal for it to get warmer as you go deeper. About 30 meters in, we found the first one. To be precise, it found us. It was a figure, humanoid in shape, standing in the middle of a narrow shelf, arms raised, face half covered, as if flinching just before something hit it. The first thing I noticed was that it was facing us, not standing facing the back of the cave, but towards the entrance, as if trying to leave, but blocked by something. The moment we saw it, we stopped moving. We weren't the only ones who stopped. The water current also stopped. It became completely still. Suspended particles froze in midair. Even the sound of our own breathing became inaudible. At first, I thought it might be part of the cave, an optical illusion or stalactite formations that had accumulated around a frame over time. That kind of thing happens underwater. But as we approached, we saw the details. The curve of the fingers, the line of the mouth barely visible through the gaps in the fingers. It wasn't just human-shaped. It was human. I could see the fingernails, neatly manicured, cut short, as if someone had just had a manicure yesterday, or something made to look exactly like a person. A few more meters in, we found another, and then another, then a dozen. They were everywhere. I tried to count them, but the numbers didn't add up. Counting from right to left, 17 figures. From left to right, 23. Counting again, 19. It was as if they were moving when I wasn't looking, wedged into crevices, leaning against walls, crouching near the floor, figures, all made of the same pale stone or mineral, or something else entirely. Each one was unique. Different poses, different faces, different moments, and not a single one looked peaceful. I should mention the material. It looked like stone, but it wasn't. It looked like metal, but it wasn't. It had a glassy transparency, but it wasn't glass. It was as if the substance itself couldn't decide what it was. One was on top of another, hands wrapped around a throat. Another had an arm around someone's shoulder, 2 figures frozen in a rigid embrace. One held a weapon, something like a blade, caught mid-swing. Time stopped an inch before impact. Let me tell you more about that blade. At first, it looked like a primitive tool made of stone, but closer up, it was clearly a modern tactical knife. I could even see the manufacturer's engraving. However, that manufacturer had gone out of business in 1970. One figure knelt on the cave floor, face turned upward, mouth wide open, frozen in what looked like some kind of scream. I heard that scream. There was no sound, but I heard it. A desperate, raw, unending scream. It resonated in my bones. I couldn't look at all of them at once. There was too much to take in. And the most terrifying thing was that one of them had my face. We couldn't understand what we were seeing. We kept our mouths shut at depth. But of course, the cameras were live streaming to the surface, and someone commented over comms. They said it was like something out of Doctor Who, stone creatures that only move when you're not looking. Weeping angels. The voices from the surface started as a joke, but over time, the tone changed. Tension, confusion, and finally, fear. They were seeing something abnormal too. I remembered that show, the old version, from when it aired in the 70s. The joke caught on, and people were calling them the angels before we even got back to the boat. But the comparison was inaccurate. Weeping angels only turn to stone when observed. These beings were always stone. The question was, had they always been stone? But they really didn't fit the name. Not everyone was covering their face, and they certainly didn't feel like something sacred. They were more like statues you'd find outside a church that had burned down and was never rebuilt. Indeed, some of them were in religious postures, poses of prayer, penitence, worship. But what they were worshiping was not a god we could understand. After we got back to the surface, I couldn't let it go. Covertly, I started researching in my own time. Nothing specific that would violate the contract. Just reading. Old records, ship logs, sailors' journals, anything that mentioned strange rock formations near the coast. I spent weeks in libraries. Microfilm of old newspapers, museum archives, private collections. The librarians were friendly at first, but their demeanor changed when they understood what I was looking for.
That material is restricted. That section is under renovation. That document has been lost.
I heard the same excuses over and over again. It took time, but I found something. A passage from a 1600s Dutch ship captain's log. His ship had been wrecked after a storm, not far from the extension of the same cliff. He wrote about taking shelter in a sea cave during the worst of it, and what he saw inside. The captain's name was Hendrik van der Berg. His logbook was miraculously preserved. It was in a waterproof leather case and had sunk with his shipwreck. It was discovered in 1892 and housed in the Maritime Museum in Amsterdam. Figures, he said. Stone people. Dozens of them. He called them the Still Ones. Van der Berg's description was detailed. He had observed them for 3 days, while waiting for the storm to pass, and he claimed he saw them move. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but surely. He wrote that they were sailors, trapped after death. Not just any sailors, those who fought, who betrayed, who left something unfinished. People who died holding on to anger, grief, love, regret. Whatever it was, it clung to them. According to Van der Berg, the Still Ones weren't just sailors. There were merchants, explorers, pirates, and occasionally, passengers. The common thread was that they all died at sea and all died without being able to complete something.
The sea remembers promises,
He wrote.
and broken promises turn to stone.
And the legend goes, if you believe it, that the sea takes them, not just their bodies, but everything restless left inside them. The cave becomes a kind of purgatory, a waiting place. And when a storm gets bad enough, the earth opens up and shows you what's been waiting underground. But Van der Berg's record had another detail, the most terrifying detail. He wrote that before he left the cave, he saw a new figure appear. It was one of his own ship's crew, a man who should have still been alive, standing in stone form against the wall.
I called his name,
Van der Berg wrote.
but he did not answer. His eyes were open, but did not see. His mouth moved, but made no sound. And I understood. The cave could also see the future.
The next day, that crewman was swept overboard in the storm and drowned. The recovery team came a few days later. We were told to stand down. They were supposed to clean up the area, collect samples, and identify what could be safely removed. The recovery team wasn't our usual team. They were all unfamiliar faces, and they moved with military precision. Their equipment was even more advanced than ours. For some of the gear, we couldn't even guess what it was for. The team leader questioned us. Not a usual debriefing, but more like an interrogation.
Did you look directly into the eyes of the figures? Did you notice their mouths moving? Did you see any figures that resembled your own face?
At that last question, my blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone, but nothing was retrieved. Equipment kept malfunctioning. Reports came back garbled. Divers were pulled from the mission without explanation. One of them was said to have claimed the statue shifted positions between dives, though official scans showed no movement. The equipment failures followed a specific pattern. Cameras would work fine, but the recordings would only show an empty cave. Comms gear would function, but messages sent would differ from messages received. Depth gauges would continue to show 200 meters, even if the actual depth was 30 meters. And the strangest thing was that some equipment improved. Batteries lasted longer than expected. Lights shone brighter. It was as if the cave itself was cooperating. One of the divers, his name was Kevin, couldn't speak after his third descent. There was no physical damage, but when he opened his mouth and tried to speak, only a stone-like sound came out. Literally, a sound like stone. Just bad footage, they said. Compression errors. But I knew the truth. Compression errors don't give figures expressions. Technical issues don't breathe life into statues. And equipment failure doesn't explain stone figures looking back at you in a recording. Ultimately, the company sealed off the entire site. Quietly, they dropped debris back into the cave from above, buried it again, acted as if it had never been opened in the first place. The sealing operation took place at night. Huge excavators and trucks blocked the coastal road. Local residents were told it was an emergency geological survey. The work continued for 72 hours, but they couldn't seal it completely. A week after the sealing, local fishermen began reporting strange things. Strange sounds from the sea at night. Sounds like grinding stone. Sounds like something trying to push its way up from below. And on moonless nights, a faint light could be seen on the surface of the sea, a light in the shape of a person. No records, no follow-up, but the lack of records became a record in itself. In the Maritime Authority files, there's an empty folder stamped, "No investigation required." In the Geological Survey database, that coordinate returns an access denied error. And then, I have to talk about Sarah. Sarah disappeared 2 weeks after the sealing. Officially, it's resigned for personal reasons, but her apartment was untouched. Coffee was still in the cup. The newspaper was open. The last time I saw her was near the sealed site, at 2 a.m., standing outside the barrier, staring at the sea. I tried to call out to her, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. She was completely still, not breathing, not blinking, and her skin glowed faintly in the moonlight. When I called her name, she slowly turned around. Her eyes were like stone, literally like stone, and she opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't words, but the sound of waves hitting rocks. The next morning, she was gone. So if you ever see them during your dives, those figures, don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't take pictures. Don't try to count how many there are. Don't linger. And most importantly, Do not look directly at them. Don't make eye contact. If you do, look away immediately, because once they see you, a part of you stays with them. And if enough of you stays, eventually you'll become one of them too. Mark the location and get out fast. There's something deeply wrong with that place. I don't know what those figures are, how they got there, or why they look like that. I just know they don't belong. Not naturally. They are a boundary line. A boundary between this world and something else. And boundaries are meant to be crossed. The question is, once you cross it, can you come back? And if you have any sense, you'll keep your distance. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. But if you're as foolish as I am, and if you want to know the truth, remember this: the truth has a cost, and that cost is paid after you know the truth. But the story of the angels isn't over yet. There's a second rule you need to know. It's the 300-meter rule. I've told you about the still ones, but now let's talk about a different kind of horror. Not legend, not supernatural phenomena. Humans. Sometimes, the most terrifying things you find on the seabed are the remnants of what humans have done to other humans. That day's recovery assignment was routine. A male body found near a restricted pier in a southern inlet. Mid-30s. Shallow water. Calm current. Floating, wedged between two pilings. Seemed like a typical drowning victim. It should have been a simple job. Descend, bag the body, mark the position, and retrieve. A job we've done hundreds of times. The body wasn't in bad shape, considering the heat. Estimated to have been in the water for a few days, maybe a week. Skin was bloated, eyeballs cloudy. As far as I could tell through my dry-suit window, no external trauma. Dressed in normal clothes, cargo pants, dark shirt, no wallet or ID. What was unusual were the hands. In this job, you get used to bodies in strange postures. Underwater, bodies move in unexpected ways. Joints stiffen, limbs bloat, arms bend at unpredictable angles. So at first, the hands didn't seem that strange. Just a little off. They felt like they didn't quite fit, and the color too, whiter than the rest of him, as if they hadn't been exposed to water for as long. It wasn't until we brought him topside that we couldn't get a fingerprint reading. Nowadays, it's standard procedure to get immediate readings from a body's fingerprints. Use a mobile reader. Connect directly to the lab to cross-reference against databases. It's not perfect, but usually you get a lead for identification. But this time, the readings failed repeatedly. Partial match. No match. Try again. 4 attempts. Still unidentified. The other hand gave the same result. That's when one of the techs noticed the demarcation line at the wrists. More like a seam than a scar. He pulled back the sleeves, and we found zip ties. Pulled tight, 3 to each wrist, hidden under the sleeves, and underneath adhesive, gray and thick, hardened over the rough skin, like someone tried to patch up a drywall. There wasn't even an attempt to hide it, just industrial-grade construction adhesive and cheap plastic zip ties, holding the hands in place. They weren't his hands. His original hands had been removed. The hands attached to him had been taken from someone else. We marked the site, took samples, and filed our report as usual. It was handed over to local authorities as a possible homicide, but that was outside our jurisdiction. Once handed over, our involvement usually ends. Lab analysis showed the wrist dismemberment happened post-mortem. No bleeding, no trauma response. Whoever this man was, he was already dead before his hands were swapped. There was no follow-up from the police. Not to us, at least. Not officially. But months later, Reports started coming in from Texas and Louisiana. Body fragments found in lakes and shallow waterways. Limbs with different DNA. Missing heads. In one case, a torso was found with 2 different sets of fingerprints. The press called the perpetrator Frankenstein, not for scientific methods or suturing skills, but simply for the mix and match approach to body parts. There was no clear pattern to the victims. No age range or gender bias. Some were listed as missing persons, others had no records. The only commonality was the method of discovery, always in water, always disassembled and reassembled, never buried. Our involvement didn't end with that first body. Over the next 5 months, we pulled up 2 more. One found in a canal near Baton Rouge. The other tangled in a fishing net off the Gulf of Mexico. Same method, same adhesive, same zip ties, same mix and match body parts. Both dumped in places only a diver would find them, and both had mismatched wrists and fingerprints. This time, we didn't just hand it over and walk away. I got directly involved in the investigation, working directly with the homicide division in Louisiana. They had been tracking scattered bodies across multiple states, but they hadn't seen the pattern until we started finding complete bodies with consistent post-mortem alterations. The killer had a pattern. It's just no one had mapped it yet. He preferred water, or rather, he chose water. He used rivers, marinas, cargo docks, anywhere currents could carry away skin cells and confuse the time of death. Something was swapped on every body. Hands, feet, in one case part of a jaw. Not to hide the victim, but to leave a signature. Eventually, we caught him. His name was Garden Ellis, 38, freelance mechanical engineer. Quiet, constantly on the move for contract work, held a marine license. No priors. So clean, no one would look twice. They caught him in a service yard. Inside a beached trawler he'd converted into a mobile workshop. Gloves, tools, samples in a chemical storage unit were found. The adhesive matched residues from our recoveries. Same brand of zip ties. Same manufacturer of bone saw. Down to the blade's grinding pattern. He's now incarcerated in a place far from water. And the man we pulled up that first day, the body with the wrong hands, was finally moved from unidentified to confirmed victim. His name was Thomas, 29. He'd been missing for almost a year. At least now, someone knows his end. This job isn't pretty. Sometimes you encounter things like that. Bodies, deaths that aren't accidental, sights you don't want to think about later. You'll witness the worst things humans can do to each other. You'll see what happens when no one is there to stop them. But the point of this job isn't just to retrieve the wreckage. It's to provide the missing pieces to someone on land. A body with the wrong hands might help connect dots. A marked location might tie into someone else's case. That stuff matters, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. It's not glamorous work. Most of the time, it's slow, quiet, unappreciated, but it's reliable, and it's important. Because when we do it right, when we find what no one else can, and bring back what someone on land needs to see, we give people answers. We help close doors that have been open too long. We help the right people put the pieces together. That's what this job means. Not buried treasure, not mysteries, just people. A lot of new recruits like you don't see it that way at first. They're chasing the adrenaline, but eventually they understand. One dive at a time. You hear a lot of strange stories in this business, but the most bizarre ones don't come from rumor. They come from the records. And this record came to us last winter. A Cold War-era Soviet submarine, diesel-electric, vanished in 1973. Its last communication was early morning on January 12th. Routine. Navigational update. No distress signal. No unusual activity. It vanished during a training patrol, about 200 miles offshore. Never resurfaced. Never signaled again. Assumed lost due to equipment failure or pressure implosion, common for subs of that generation, especially back then. The sea swallows things fast. No debris was ever found. For 50 years, that was it. Then, last year, it appeared. Suddenly. A routine sonar sweep by a NATO cartography team picked it up on the edge of a continental shelf. Complete hull signature. No damage, no disintegration, no scattering. Intact. Sitting upright on the seabed, as if it had just parked there and was waiting. The coordinates matched the submarine's last known position from 1973. We were called in for inspection. The briefing was thin but specific. No signs of collision. No obvious pressure damage. Paint still intact, original paint, based on spectral analysis. External lights still operational. The submarine's outer shell looked like it had been put there last week, not 50 years ago. No barnacles, no corrosion, no wear, just dust. That was the first red flag. Even in the cold temperatures and weak currents of the deep sea, metal ages. Especially something like a submarine exposed to pressure, salinity, and total darkness for 50 years. But this showed no signs of aging whatsoever. No chemical erosion, no rust, no discoloration. The weld lines looked like they had been made in the same month. It wasn't just preserved, it was untouched. We approached from the starboard side and entered through the top hatch. The locking mechanism clicked like it had been oiled yesterday. The air inside was completely still. Emergency lights flickered on as our movements triggered proximity sensors. Everything worked. Consoles lit up. Backup systems responded. The internal climate was stable. There was no trace of the crew. Every bunk was made. Every locker was closed. Tools were secured to shelves. Plates in the mess hall were still stacked. No cracks, no algae. There was no water damage anywhere. More than that, nothing was broken. No collapsed bulkheads. No signs of emergency evacuation or decompression. Nothing. It was as if everyone had just stepped out for a break. The strangest detail was the clock system. All Cold War submarines operated with a network of synchronized internal clocks. Military timing circuits wired directly into navigation logs, engine cycles, communications gear. These subs were built for discipline. Nothing happened without a timestamp. The clocks were still running. From the bridge to the engine room, every clock was stopped at 0:44 a.m. January 12, 1973. Not burned out. Not degraded. Just stop. The internal logs were another story. We recovered hard copy logbooks from the bridge, meticulously kept, neat handwriting, daily entries. The last entry was routine. Position data, weather, surveillance logs. It matched the timestamp. But someone had kept logging even after the clock stopped. 7 more hours of entries. No digital backup. No record of anomalies or confusion. Just regular entries about power levels, duty rotations, sonar sweeps. It was normal, as if the ship hadn't noticed it was frozen in time. And then the log just stops. No final sentence. No farewell. No trace of the crew. 47 enlisted men and officers. Not a single one on board. No signs of ejection. No use of escape pods. No record of oxygen depletion. Their uniforms were still folded in their lockers. Their shoes were lined up under their bunks. Everything was in its place, except the people. We ran a full diagnostic, thermal scans, sub-bottom radar, electromagnetic field sweeps. Nothing abnormal, no radiation, no evidence of tampering or sabotage. All records matched the original Soviet reports from 1973, except for one thing. The submarine's ID tag, the one stamped into the inner hull, didn't match the original serial number, where it should have been 07. It read 32, a 2-digit difference. We reported it to command. The response was swift. Record it, tag it, seal it. They designated the site classified and pulled the team within 24 hours. Recovery was ruled out. No samples were allowed from the vessel. It was flagged as historical wreckage, preservation recommended. That's polite language for leave it alone, don't ask questions, don't go back. And I don't think anyone has sense. It's still on the seabed, completely intact, waiting on the edge of the shelf. Lights still on, tables still set, as if the dive isn't over. There's no damage, no clue how it got there, no answer to where the crew went, and no way to explain what happened in those 7 hours from when the clocks stopped ticking until someone last logged something. And like a lot of the jobs we do, there's no follow-up, just a blank. And no one has ever explained how a perfectly intact Cold War submarine could vanish without a trace for half a century and then reappear in perfect condition, lights still on. And that's the part that sticks with you. Not just the vanishing, but the timing. The sub went missing at 0:44 a.m. All internal systems stopped logging at that exact time, but the crew kept logging for almost 7 hours after that, meaning either the clocks were wrong or something happened that wasn't recorded by any system, something that took 47 trained crewmen without a trace. No wreckage, no flooding, no bodies, just silence and nothing. There are many such things people refuse to acknowledge. Unexplained events, strange wreckage, empty vessels, equipment that stops working the moment you pass a certain depth, divers who come back different or don't come back at all. These stories aren't published. They aren't in training manuals. They're passed down the same way I'm telling you now. I'm not the superstitious type. I'm not the man who talks about deep-sea curses or fate or ancient beings. I trust data. I believe in evidence. But I've been in this job long enough to know there's a limit to what can be measured. And beyond that boundary, there's just what we've seen. So, when the old-timers talk about the strange things they've encountered, you need to listen. You need to pay attention. Not because every story is true like a lab test, but because each one teaches you how to notice something out of place. And knowing what's out of place is how you survive. That's why I tell these stories. Not for entertainment, not to scare you, because this is how the job works. It's not all equipment and technology and textbook procedures. Some of it is memory. Some of it is knowing what happened to the people who came before you and why they made the choices they did. That's how things used to be passed down before everyone had a manual. The ones who saw the worst would sit you down and tell you what they encountered. Not everything had a perfect explanation, but everything had a purpose. Every story has a lesson. That's what matters. And this story? This one reminds you that not every disappearance looks like an accident. Some are something else. So here's the rule. When something looks too clean, too perfect, too untouched, you pay attention. If wreckage missing for 50 years reappears with working lights, you don't just treat it like any other sub. You slow down. You ask why. You mark the time, and you double-check your escape route, because nothing stays untouched by accident for that long. and nothing stays hidden that deep, unless it's meant to. You'd think that would be the strangest recovery. It wasn't. A call came in from a small port in southeastern Brazil. Request to recover an unidentified body, 80 feet deep. Local authorities found it, but without the proper equipment or expertise, we got the contract. The water in that area is murky, greenish-brown, churned with silt from currents and river runoff. Visibility is poor on a good day. You don't see the seabed until you're right on top of it. That stretch of coast is littered with old chains, scrap metal, anchors, and the twisted iron of a dozen half-buried vessels that have sunk since the 80s and 90s. Don't grab onto just anything in a hurry. We descended slowly, following the coordinates, heading for the seabed. Sonar picked up a dense metallic signature, an anchor chain, extending from a nearby collapsed hull. That wreck was on record. A cargo ship, sunk by an engine room fire in 1994. 37 crew confirmed. No missing passenger records. Cargo of low value, so no official recovery efforts had been made. The body was found 20 feet from the stern, both ankles double wrapped in the anchor chain. The rope fused to the calcified surface of his leg bones, hardened over time. Not floating. Positioned slightly above the seabed, resting his back against the chain. No movement. No damage. No signs of trauma. He was wearing a tuxedo, black jacket, tie neatly done, shirt faded to a light gray by the seawater. The fabric should have rotted away years ago in that environment, but it hadn't. Discolored and stiff, but not damaged. His skin was hard, smooth ash white, calcified like coral. No signs of bloating. No loss of soft tissue. His face was perfectly preserved. His eyes were open, and his mouth was packed with sea glass, mostly green and brown, the kind you find smoothed by waves. Dozens of shards jammed behind his teeth. Someone had forced a handful in, then closed his jaw, but there was no damage to the jawline, no breakage from compression. His mouth was open when it happened, or it stayed open. The body was neutrally buoyant underwater, neither sinking nor floating. Still, we tagged it and surfaced, then retrieved it in a sealed case the next day. Local medical examiner was called, but no matches in databases, no dental records, no missing persons lists domestic or international, no papers in his pockets. No tattoos. Nothing. We tried every angle to find a name. Searched regional marriage registrations for the past 30 years. Investigated men who went missing at sea during wedding seasons. Checked cargo ship manifests, considering the possibility of unofficial passengers. Nothing. No one claimed him. We had the body, the suit, and the date. While at the site, an old local dock worker told us a story he'd heard as a child. They called the body the groom of the bay. He said it like it was common knowledge, like everyone knew. He said there's an old story told in that town. A story parents tell young couples the day before their wedding. More a warning than a horror story. If you see a man, usually alone, go into the water before a wedding, waist deep in the surf, hands clasped, eyes open, then the wedding won't happen. The groom vanishes, or the bride runs. Sometimes a storm comes. Sometimes something worse. Seeing him means that marriage is already over, before it even begins. So couples were told not to go near the shore before the ceremony. Superstition, mostly. Like walking under ladders or wearing the wrong colors. But people followed it. Even today, local wedding planners factor it into their schedules. No beach access. No photos on the pier. Just in case. When we described what we found, the tuxedo, the anchor, the sea glass, They weren't surprised. A few nodded, said it matched the old story. They said the man had no name, cursed or betrayed. It varied depending on who you asked. Some said he threw himself in after being left at the altar. Others said he was killed by jealous family. The only commonalities were the water, the tuxedo, and the open eyes. One version even mentioned the sea glass, filling his mouth so he couldn't speak. That part stuck with me. Normally, I'd dismiss it. Folklore fills the blanks where facts can't. But this wasn't an ambiguous sighting or a shadow caught on camera. This was a fully dressed, perfectly preserved body, beyond reason, chained to the wreckage of a ship that wasn't on his record. And there was no way to explain why he seemed placed there, not lost. No missing persons, no crime report, no clue how long he'd been there. It didn't match anything, but the anchor did. Same metal, same part number as the 1994 shipwreck. No doubt, meaning he either sank with that ship and wasn't listed for some reason, or he was placed there later using the recovered chain. But the body hadn't aged like it was from 1994. It hadn't aged at all. We handed it over, filed the report, and moved on. Unidentified, no prints, no personal effects, no official records to match. The body was marked unidentified male, presumed historical. The file was closed within weeks. Another anomaly boxed and pushed aside. But I still remember his expression. Not panic, not peace. Just still, as if he was waiting there for someone to find him. So I'll tell you this. When you're working in unfamiliar waters, listen to the locals. Not everything they say is superstition. Some stories are for entertainment, sure, but some are warnings. Old ones, passed down because people once saw something and decided it was better to remember than forget. Discern which is which, and take the right one seriously, just in case. That's all for now. You've heard the stories, at least, the ones I think you're ready for. There are others, many more. Some you wouldn't believe. Some are worse. But they can wait. You haven't done enough dives yet. These stories are just the first layer, like the surface of the water, calm and peaceful from above, but hiding everything beneath. You could listen to me talk all day, and sure, it might help. But it's not the same as seeing it yourself. Feeling that pressure, hearing only your own breathing, finding something on the seabed that no one expected. That's when you start to change. I'm not telling you these stories to scare you. I'm not trying to create a big mystery out of what can't be understood. I'm just giving you what the manual leaves out. The kind of thing old veterans used to pass from diver to diver. And as I said before, every story has a lesson. Some of them might save your life. But don't forget, this job isn't about stories. It's about doing, diving, recovering what others can't reach. Not because it's easy, not because it always makes sense, but because you can. That's the only real reason we're out there. We're trained, we're steady, and when things get weird, we don't panic. When it's time, we surface, and when the job demands it, we stay silent. You'll get your own stories eventually. Until then, keep your head clear, your gear clean, and your lines tight. I've talked enough. Get your gear on. There's work to do.